Start shortly.
Order, order. Selene Saxby to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered floating offshore wind and AR6, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Philip. I would also like to thank the Backbench Business Committee for securing today's debate, and actually to the Minister for agreeing to continue with today's debate despite yesterday's announcement, because I do feel this is a topic that will be ongoing regardless of what happens over the rest of this summer. I'd also like to thank the Department and the Minister and the rest of the ministerial team for their ongoing engagement on this issue, and also increasing the administrative strike price for Allocation Round 6, which I will refer to as AR6. The industry welcomed the administrative strike price at AR6 with the uplift from £60 megawatts per hour from 116 to 176, demonstrating that the government has listened to the industry and signalled a policy change that acknowledges the changing economic landscape for developers. Following the Committee for Climate Change's recommendations, floating offshore wind, which I'll refer to as FLOW, is set to make up to 5 gigawatts of our energy generation by 2030 and 50 gigawatts by 2050. The UK is a leader in FLOW, with the largest pipeline of floating projects globally, with leases of 33 gigawatts and 2 pioneer projects in Scotland, Kincardine and Highwind. FLOW has the potential to bring 29,000 jobs and £43.5 billion in gross value added to the UK by 2050, a prospect that should fill us with optimism. However, we need to ensure that we are ahead of the curve and not just deploy this technology for energy generation, but also harness its full potential by developing the manufacturing element. But all of this is only technically feasible if we develop FLOW at a large scale. To do this, we need port investment from FlowMIS, but most importantly, a coordinated strategy with stepping stone projects to make this happen. As chair of the Celtic Sea All-Party Parliamentary Group, I will be making a strong case today for FLOW in that region. I've had significant input from Professor Deborah Greaves from the University of Plymouth and the team at Renewable UK, and would like to thank them for their contribution to my speech today. FLOW in the Celtic Sea region offers unique advantages, allowing us to harness energy regardless of wind direction. Despite its previous neglect due to seabed depths, FLOW can be deployed in waters deeper than 60 metres, unlocking 80% of our offshore wind resource. This technology presents a significant opportunity for the region's economic growth and net zero benefits. In 2024, the Crown Estate launched the leasing round for up to 4.5 gigawatts in the Celtic Sea, a crucial component in the battle to mitigate climate change and progress to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. I'm pleased to see the Crown Estate is taking what steps it can to drive onshore benefits through its leasing round, but a tender process is only one mechanism for realising the opportunities arising from projects such as these. A coordinated national infrastructure approach for the Celtic Sea is crucial. This approach, ideally as a bespoke strategy, is necessary to overcome the ongoing delays and issues we are currently facing and to ensure the successful development of FLOW in the region. I'm glad to hear that Renewable UK, the Crown Estate and others have published an industrial growth plan which looks to coordinate the investments needed to realise the opportunity, including prioritising where those investments will have most impact. Using the Industrial Growth Plan as a blueprint to bring forward an industrial strategy for the Celtic Sea, which provides clarity on how those private investments can coordinate with public investment in critical infrastructure like ports, will provide other investors with the long-term certainty they need to ensure Round 5 and future Celtic Sea projects are as successful as possible. But the importance of AR6 cannot be understated. At the moment, investor confidence is low, partly due to the failure of the Contracts for Difference CFD in 2023 in AR5 to secure any contracts for offshore wind. This is compounded by international competition and the attractiveness of other markets, which are significantly investing in FLOW infrastructure. The competition, in my mind, is stopping the evolution of FLOW. There are currently 4 FLOW projects that can bid into AR6, with a total capacity of 658 megawatts. Blythe at 58, which is in Northumberland, presented by EDF Renewables and Ireland. Erebus, which is 100 megawatts in the Celtic Sea by Blue Gen Wind, which is backed by Total Energies and the Simply Blue Group. Pentland, 100 megawatts in Scotland, backed by Copenhagen infrastructure partners. And one new innovation and targeted oil and gas project, Green Volt, which received consent in April, which can bid 400 megawatts. The budget at AR6 needs to be big enough to accommodate not only the projects that lost out in AR5, but also those that would have bid into AR6, so as to not have a knock-on effect on future allocation rounds. I cannot stress enough the future benefits to getting the budget right in this round, and as many of these projects that are viable out to sea as rapidly as possible. The opportunity here is to not only regain lost ground, but also support flows growth into the future. This means that while a typical budget might accommodate 1 or 2 projects, this year's budget needs to accommodate 3 or 4. Without these stepping stone projects, we run a risk of higher costs for future commercial scale projects and creating mixed signals for investors in projects, supply chains and ports. Every project that bids and has cleared the hurdles by the department should be able to progress, especially if projects are ready to float. Historically, Celtic Sea ports have not received the same levels of investment that have helped their North Sea counterparts develop the supply chain and port capabilities that are necessary to deploy flow. It is indeed hugely disappointing that the only successful flow project in AR4, the Hexagon project in Cornwall, did not see its associated port, Falmouth, receiving any funding from FlowMIS. The dislocation of these spending decisions is bewildering to those of us working with developers in the region. As I have already said, investor confidence is low following the lack of bids into AR5, and we have to encourage external investment. And this is simply not the direction of travel we have been seeing from government spending decisions in recent times. Whilst I understand the budget is a matter for the Treasury in the future, I have also met with the current Exchequer Secretary of the Treasury to ask for a budget big enough to maximise the number of winning projects and accommodate those who couldn't bid in AR5, as the Pot 2 budget needs to be big enough to accommodate multiple projects. This is essential to allow Celtic Sea projects to move forward at the same pace as North Sea projects. The Celtic Sea regions of the South West and Wales are economically deprived areas, so there is a great opportunity for impact on the region's economy and society, but there needs to be huge innovation to commercialise the sector fully. With my Celtic Sea hat on, effective routes to investment could include Celtic Sea ring-fence CFD allocations. Indeed, I would allow each region to have its own pot. We need these small test and demonstration sites to succeed before any business is going to invest the kind of money required to deliver the flow of the future this country needs. I was told yesterday that developers are spending £50 million before they even get their bid in for their contract for difference, and it will cost £1 billion to build a stepping stone project. We should also look to the past, as fixed offshore wind was not required to bid in this competitive way until 5 gigawatt had already been secured. We need dedicated Celtic Sea flow misallocations, we need place-based investment, regional coordination of public funds, and proper net zero plans for the region. The CFD budget plays a vital role in supporting the development of flow in both the North Sea and the Celtic Sea, but it must be substantial enough to ensure the progress of multiple flow projects each year, thereby preventing a monopoly in the North Sea and ensuring a fair distribution of resources. Looking at port investment, I am pleased that one Celtic Sea port has been supported through Port Talbot in Wales. However, I would urge the government to look at a multi-port strategy, because we know that no single all-purpose port can accommodate the scale of flow development and the need to serve such a large area of ocean. An increase in budget requires more FlowMIS funding rounds, and the decision for allocating grant funding should be reviewed to better apportion the budget to support multiple ports in the Celtic Sea region, taking into consideration the stepping stone nature of the Celtic Sea flow projects. I was, as mentioned, hugely disappointed that no funding had been made available to Port Falmouth, given its partnership with Hexagon's Twin Hub. They had successfully bid for their CFD in AR4, and the Twin Hub project is therefore far more advanced than others. But the absence of FlowMIS funding will now make it more challenging for these partners to deliver their project, and will almost certainly see all of the onshore benefits of this vital project go overseas. The stepping stone nature of the Celtic Sea flow project seems to have been omitted from the decision criteria for FlowMIS, and the all-party parliamentary group will continue to seek to engage with ministers to secure additional port funding into Falmouth and other ports around the Celtic Sea as more projects secure release. I would like to take this opportunity to share the diverse mix of port facilities across the region, including Falmouth, which is ideal for deep water logistics and fabrication, Appledore for shipbuilding, low-carbon vessel innovation and servicing, Plymouth and South Devon Freeport, marine innovation and blue tech investment, and the Smart Sound Plymouth autonomous vehicle test range, and Portland Port, a potential logistics hub. Ilfracombe, in my own constituency, is ideally located for ops and maintenance. For Wales, my right honourable friend, the member for Preseli Pembrokeshire, made me aware of the challenges with the Port of Milford Haven. Whilst he could not be here today, he has worked closely with me as Vice Chair of the Celtic Sea APPG to ensure the Department's support of the Port of Milford Haven project. The Port of Milford Haven stands ready to create a new green energy terminal in Pembroke Dock. As the closest port to the Celtic Sea development sites, the Port of Milford Haven's development ambitions at Criterion Quay for a 400-megawatt test and demonstration phase and a fit-for-purpose site for integration and operations and maintenance activities are crucial in the support of future commercial-scale phases of flow in the Celtic Sea. The APPG's main ask today is that there are subsequent rounds of FLOMIS grants and to increase the £160 million scheme budget. The government's support of the Hexagon's Twin Hub project is crucial, especially as the sector has been battling a much-changed economic environment since its bid. With Falmouth Port ready to match government funding, this first stepping stone project needs that vital FLOMIS leg up to see optimal onshore benefits alongside this innovative leading offshore project. Funding decisions should be made on FLOMIS as quickly as possible to allow our ports and supply chain to gear up for this huge opportunity to ensure ports work collaboratively and optimise supply chain expertise. Another issue that can pose a stumbling block for flow, which I am dealing with firsthand in my North Devon constituency, is the national grid and cable routes with the Whitecross wind farm project. Since my election, I have championed floating offshore wind. Getting the Celtic Sea projects right would create huge economic opportunities for the local economy in North Devon. I have previously raised concerns about the Whitecross wind farm project because of the route submitted to planning, which involves tunnelling through several miles of highly designated sand dunes, which will severely disrupt several businesses for many years to come. And whilst this week some community engagement has been ongoing, the community benefit proposed for this project and the manner in which engagement has progressed has been severely lacking. Whilst communities locally are hugely supportive of flow, there are environmental concerns with cable corridor routes, and certain developments risk undermining all the support that has been generated along the southwest coastline in particular. Because of the scale of this project, the decision about whether it goes ahead now lies entirely with the Marine Management Organisation who approved the work to the shoreline, a North Devon District Council's planning authority. And whilst I have no influence on this decision, I am pushing that the community is properly recompensed for any associated disruption. The Whitecross project is not yet through the planning process and is now blighted by an issue with bats, bizarrely objections now from Natural England, who were the main reason this cable route was chosen in the first place, along with approaching 1,000 objections on the North Devon planning portal. This site has been leased from the Crown Estate, and apparently the only viable grid connection is at Yelland, which is a highly contentious site in its own right, and getting from the wind turbines to that connection is going to be hugely problematic, whichever company tries to develop it. I know strategic work on the grid is ongoing, but we need to better link these huge infrastructure projects together, as the current piecemeal approach is causing unnecessary distress to communities and businesses, untold environmental damage from a project that is designed to help reduce our carbon footprint long term. And frankly, we need to follow Tim Pick's strategy to deliver flow right around the coast effectively and efficiently. My genuine fear is that if the budget is not increased adequately for AR6, the Celtic Sea project, which we hope has bid, may not proceed, as Hexagon alone is not going to be a big enough step to the next project. And as I've said countless times, for those doubters of wind, the wind blows the other way in the Celtic Sea to the northeast. Then, therefore, we optimise our wind resource and energy security by ensuring all the regions are able to participate in flow, are able to do so. Again, I urge the Minister to hear the objectives of the Celtic Sea APPG to coordinate a more strategic approach to this new region for offshore renewables to avoid some of the cabling issues that we have already seen on the east coast. The national grid needs to also work to minimise onshore disruption from this vital infrastructure. And I want to restate the asks today. we need dedicated Celtic Sea funding and an integrated port and infrastructure strategy, working across the Celtic Sea region to derive maximum benefit from flow developments, ideally treating the entire region as one national infrastructure project. This could also include establishing sector-based working groups that engage developers, the Crown Estate, National Grid, ports and regional stakeholders to ensure strategically phased developments to support supply chain engagement and prioritisation of infrastructure spend in the region. Looking at future CFDs, the CFD needs to support multiple flow projects a year to ensure their progress and to make up the lost ground in AR5. The individual support for Celtic Sea's first flow project, Twin Hub, with recognition of its stepping stone nature, is vital to ensuring the development of the supply chain. We need to remove the barriers to flow, and whilst I know the Celtic Sea is a different kettle of fish to flow elsewhere, there is one thing in common, and that is the barriers to planning and applications. The barriers to delivering flow must be removed to ensure lasting benefits. Streamlining the planning and consenting process and increasing cooperation between government departments from DESNES, DEFRA, Department for Transport and others taking a whole systems approach could be transformational. For the Celtic Sea, the APPG preference throughout has been that a single cable corridor to Devon and Cornwall and one to South Wales was established to reduce seafloor damage and cabling on shore as the bigger projects go out to sea. A strategic view taken on cable corridors might also reduce costs. As a deeper level, there is also a skills piece that interlinks with our flow projects. The Crown Estate estimates that up to £1.4 billion could be generated for the UK economy, with up to 5,300 new jobs created within the supply chain. The creation of a skills task force to strategically bring together sector developers and education providers will unlock the workforce needed to deliver and ensure that local people, particularly those in economically deprived areas, develop career opportunities for now and future generations. Getting this right has financial implications, so I know some of these decisions will involve the Treasury, and I will continue to lobby for a budget big enough to maximise the number of winning projects and accommodate those who couldn't bid into AR5. One of my six-point plan for North Devon is to ensure we fully benefit from the green economy, and I'm doing so here today because if fully recognised, flow will create high-value jobs and strengthen local economies, whilst bolstering research and development within the industry so that the UK can become a world leader and exporter of flow.
The question is that this House has considered floating offshore wind and allocation round 6 of the Contracts for Difference scheme. Peter Grant.
Thank you, Sir Philip. It's a slightly strange experience here, realising that summing up to the debate could well run on for quite a bit longer than the debate itself. Can I thank the Honourable Lady from North Devon for securing this debate and commend her on the quality of the speech she's delivered. It's clearly something that she's put a great deal of time into researching. It seems to me that the byword for our future energy security strategy has got to be diversity or variability, if you want. So every opportunity that is out there for us to secure renewable energy, we should be looking at it. We shouldn't be turning anything down just now. Offshore wind has been recognised for some time, and given that the technology now allows us to float wind turbines rather than try to anchor them to the sea, it massively increases the amount of our waters that can be potentially tapped for wind. And as the Honourable Lady has pointed out, having the installations in different parts, around different parts of the UK, increases the chances that wind is going to be blown in the right direction somewhere. The government set a target of 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. That's not that long ahead of us now, and they're hoping that 5 gig will come from floating offshore wind. At the moment, we've got probably less than 100 megawatts, so we're nowhere near where we need to be. We've got, what's that, about a 50th of what the government are looking for. It was welcome news in November when, as has been mentioned, the government increased the strike prices for both floating and fixed offshore wind. But the announcement of how much the budget was going to be wasn't nearly so welcomed. And my concern is that if the government, or whichever government it is in a few weeks' time, if the government doesn't listen again to the industry, then we could have another rerun of the calamity that was allocation round 5, where nobody put in a bid for offshore wind at all. So we have to view round 6 against the backdrop of 2 previous failures. In allocation round 4, almost 3 gigawatts of offshore wind just didn't come into fruition. As we mentioned, in round 5, there was no interest at all. In round 5, the government managed to set the strike price for offshore wind energy so low that not a single wind producer could afford to sign up for it. And it shouldn't have surprised anybody, because industry leaders had been telling the government for some time before the official auction they would have to increase the strike price. The government decided it knew better, and as a result, there were no bids at all in round 5. And that has put us seriously behind where we need to be and where the government wants to be. If the government are now aiming to reach their 2030 target of 50 gigawatts, they need to secure another 21 gigawatts over the next 2 allocation rounds. There's unlikely to be time for around 8. So that means that round 6 and round 7 both need to average about 10.5 gigawatts each. To put that into context, Sir Philip, that's almost double the highest figure achieved in any single previous round. So we've already left ourselves in a position where we have to massively increase the pace of build, massively increase the scale of each installation, that we either increase the scale or increase the number of projects that we can fund. We can't continue to only fund one project with each round. Energy UK have forecast that based on the current budget, round 6 is likely to deliver between 3 and 5 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity. That will leave us looking for 16 gigawatts from round 7, an almost impossible task when you consider how little we have over the previous rounds. So when the budget was set where it was, it's been set at a level that the industry are telling us is too low. Now, okay, industry businesses are there to make a profit. They're quite good at telling the government they need more money when they don't. But they weren't crying wolf last time. They weren't crying wolf in round 5, and I don't think they're crying wolf in round 6. The disaster, the humiliation that was round 5 was completely preventable, and the current jeopardy facing round 6 is preventable as well. If the government is serious, really serious about supporting innovation and the development of new renewable energy technologies such as floating offshore wind, they need to be prepared to invest in it, because, as has already been mentioned again, other people are. They're going to take the lead from us. We are, and certainly should be, a leader in this technology. Scotland's a world leader in a number of renewable energy technologies. Floating offshore wind, as has been mentioned, gives greater flexibility. About 80% of Europe's offshore wind resource is estimated to be in waters that are more than 60 metres deep, which is too deep for a fixed wind turbine, but is very exploitable for floating turbines. In Scotland, we know we're an energy-rich country. We already produce significantly more energy than we need. We're a world leader in a lot of renewable energy technologies, including offshore wind, including hydrogen, which is being developed, as members will know, in my constituency along the coast in Methil and Buckhaven. So we've got the capacity, we've got the world-leading technology, we've got the expertise. What's holding us back is a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of visible commitment from a succession of governments. We've got a long history in Scotland of developing floating systems to use in the oil and gas sector. That technology is adaptable. We've got the people with the ability to adapt that expertise in the same way as adapted the previous expertise in fixed drilling installations for oil and gas, and that was used in the design of the earlier generations of wind turbines. It's maybe hard to believe now, but when the contracts for difference model was originally set up, it was hailed as a gold standard. It was one of the best ways of securing renewable energy investment anyone had ever come up with, and it has achieved quite a lot. But I think the lesson, or one of the lessons of the failure of allocation round 5 is that while other countries and other economies have continued to push forward at pace, the UK has started to fall back. In recent years, while successive allocation rounds in the UK have failed, we've seen the implementation of, for example, inflation reduction in the US, the Green Deal in the European Union. And that means that when green energy companies are looking at somewhere to invest, and a lot of these people will invest anywhere, they see tax credits in America, they see subsidies in the European Union, and they see what to them all too often looks like half-hearted commitment from the United Kingdom. And if that continues, then we're going to start to lose that investment. The UK government should be doing what it can to make sure that Scotland and indeed the rest of the UK retains its world-leading position at the front of the green energy transition revolution. And they can do that by increasing funding to green energy programmes, including floating offshore wind and indeed fixed onshore wind. It's estimated there's between 8 and 12 gigawatts of offshore wind projects around the UK that's already got planning consent, is ready to go, if somebody will just provide some of the investment that it needs. They're already there. If the contracts for difference, they get the capacity, they can all be brought on stream much more quickly. They're ready to start building to produce the clean, reliable and cheap energy that we know we're going to need to meet our net zero climate change targets. So on these benches, the SNP will continue to call on whoever is in government after the election to introduce a comprehensive industrial strategy that includes identification of where our longer-term energy needs are going to be met. They should be aiming to match the Scottish Government's Just Transition Fund, investing at least £28 billion a year into the green transition. I know that the potential government in waiting have ditched their promises. I hope they will reinstate them in their election manifesto. Renewable energy industry, Sir Philip, is an essential component of Scotland's long-term growth strategy. We can be world leaders. We are already world leaders. We want to maintain that position. We cannot allow a UK government of any persuasion to hold Scotland back in the 2020s in the same way as they did back in the 1970s and 80s.
Dr. Alan Whitehead.
Well, thank you, Sir Philip, and I'd like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for North Devon in securing this debate. It is sad but understandable that there are not more members present in the chamber this afternoon to either take part in the debate or listen to it. But I have to say, if those honourable members had been present, they would have heard a really comprehensive and substantive contribution from the honourable member for North Devon in support, as she has done on so many occasions, of floating offshore wind. And there really isn't very much in what she had to say that I could disagree with. And indeed a great deal in what she had to say that I could strongly support, and certainly on this side we could strongly support. The potential of a floating wind is now, I think, pretty undisputed. It is a technology which can, as it were, go where other offshore wind can't go. It's particularly adaptable for deeper waters and more difficult circumstances, and indeed for parts of the UK that otherwise would not have much in the way of floating offshore in its area. So the ability of floating offshore to take the offshore wind revolution to its next stage is manifest, both in the Celtic Sea, in Scotland, in the northeast of England, to ensure that we have got wind wherever we can take advantage of those wind speeds around the UK that are such a national and international asset as far as our country is concerned. Certainly as far as the opposition is concerned, then we want to see at least 5 gigawatts of floating offshore wind, I emphasise at least, deployed by 2030. And indeed we want to see not only that deployment, but we want to see the arrangements in place where that deployment can be properly supported. So we envisage that the Great British Energy, for example, would play a substantial role in taking stakes in future flow as it goes forward and supporting it all the way. But also, as far as the National Wealth Fund is concerned, which we are proposing to establish, that fund itself plays a substantial role, along with other bodies such as the Crown Estate, in developing the infrastructure that's going to be necessary to support flow for the future. And on that matter, we do know that the infrastructure at present is sorely lacking, as the Honourable Member for North Devon mentioned. The port infrastructure, the infrastructure for securing the assembly of floating platforms, for the erection of platforms and the servicing of platforms for the future. All of these need substantial upgrading in port facilities, and indeed, whilst it is sort of a little bit encouraging that the FlowMIS programme did allocate some funding for port development, as the Honourable Member for North Devon has stated, it clearly is by no means enough to get the infrastructure properly underway. So we need, as Renewable UK has recently mentioned, at least 11 ports, something like that, for support of floating offshore wind, and not just Port Talbot and the port in Scotland that has been supported by FlowMIS. And then we come to the question of how we actually get that 5 gigawatts at least of flow installed by 2030. And as the Honourable Member for Glenrothes has pointed out in his contribution, if you do the sums as far as what our ambitions are concerned with offshore generally and flow in particular, we've just got to move ahead far, far quicker in allocation rounds than we have done in the past, and we are anticipated to do in the immediate future. And of course, this is against a backdrop of pretty total failure to fund and support either flow or offshore fixed wind in the most recent allocation round, and indeed in the allocation round to a considerable extent before that. So the figures for how much we've got to get put in place per allocation round, both in fixed offshore and floating offshore, over the next several rounds, are compelling and show that we've got to move far, far faster and far, far more extensively in order to get the to secure those particular arrangements for the future. And of course, as far as flow is concerned, and moving into AR6, the prognosis appears pretty bleak. It looks like, in terms of the arrangements that have been put in place, that perhaps just one flow project will actually fit within the budget that there is for the allocation in pot 2, the particular pot within which flow sits. Despite the fact that there are already, again, as the Honourable Member for North Devon has mentioned, there are at least 4 projects that are shovel ready to go right now, and could easily fit within that allocation, were that allocation to be made available to them. And that, by the way, I don't think includes right now the Hexagon project, but that's a really important project that needs an enormous amount of support, particularly because it's got twin turbine capacity, which is a further step forward in floating offshore wind technology, and can actually take the whole flow arrangement well forward. So we've got the beginnings of a real breakthrough as far as flow is concerned, probably directly hampered by what is in store for us now as far as AR6 is concerned. And it is something that really shouldn't be allowed to stand. Now, of course, we are in rather different circumstances than we were yesterday morning, where I might have been standing here today asking the government to do various things over the summer to sort out some of these particular problems. So what I will be doing today is asking the next government, whoever they are, to get on with it very quickly, particularly because AR6 itself is already well through its various design iterations, and there is a very, very limited window for changing anything particular in AR6 before it goes finally out for the tendering for the various projects. So it is something that will land on the desk pretty immediately of the government of whatever party comes in after the election. And by pretty immediately, it literally means the possibility only within about a month after a new government has taken its place to actually get this right as far as AR6 is concerned and floating offshore wind is concerned. Because the problem for flow here is not the uplift in administrative strike price, which the government did actually do not a bad job on in terms of looking at where the price was and where the price should be for AR6. The problem is the budget that's been allocated for this particular pot. And it is clear that were there to be a reasonable uplift in that budget, then the possibility of a number of those shovel-ready projects being included within AR6 Pot 2 successes would be a pretty high prospect. Now, of course, I can't specify what a new government is likely to do, but I would think the case for early action to put that right is quite compelling. And I hope even today the Minister will commit himself as far as he has any capacity in the few days we have left before we all pack up and start knocking doors, if you haven't already, by the way. I hope the Minister will actually do whatever he can to get that action underway as far as his department is concerned. Because I think this is a case pretty immediately of a looming loss of opportunity for floating offshore wind, and the wider prospect that a technology which we have a world lead in across the world is almost immediately going to start falling away. If we don't get these projects underway, early, then, as the Honourable Member for North Devon has said, that has a chain reaction, that people lose confidence in the investment, they take their investment elsewhere, the projects themselves don't progress, the appetite for investment in infrastructure starts to fall away, and the whole thing starts to disintegrate. So it is a vital juncture we are at the moment, and I hope the government, in its last few days, can actually grasp the opportunity of making that right as far as investment in flow is concerned.
Minister.
Thank you, Sir Philip, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And normally Westminster Hall debates would have overwhelming numbers of speakers. Heaven knows what has distracted our colleagues on what we could all agree is a very important debate. And I would say I pay tribute to my honourable friend from North Devon, who could easily have been distracted herself today, but will never miss an opportunity to champion her community. And I will return to my wonderful honourable friend shortly. But I would also just like to take a slight deviation, because as I was bounding up the steps for this debate with the Shadow Minister, it dawned on me this is his final contribution, as he will sadly be retiring. And he is held in high regard across all sides of this House. We will all, in the coming weeks, as we seek re-election, be championing our local credentials, but you'll be hard-pressed to beat the Shadow Minister's credentials of being the local candidate for Southampton, having been the Student Union chairman in Southampton University, the leader of the council, no less. And not only has he been elected since 97, but God loves a trier, he also went in 83, 87 and 92. So for those colleagues who don't quite get the result that they feel they deserve, just keep going and you will get here. And he has always conducted himself with a real passion for his areas of interest, his contributions always backed up with thorough research, and that is why he's held in the highest regard. And as the newest member of the DESNES team, I admire his shadow role, has been in various variations shadowing this department since 2015. So he will genuinely be a loss to this Parliament, and it is a pleasure to have listened to what will be his final contribution, as powerful as it is. And whilst he recognises nobody can definitely say who is the government, he will have had that one last opportunity to shape what goes forward in this very important area. And finally, we do share one interest, which is we both played for the parliamentary football team. And whilst he looks excellent for 73, I think, having seen some of his performances over the years as a goalkeeper, there is still chance for a late call-up. Now he has a little bit more time on his hands, and we all look forward to cheering him on in Portugal. Anyway, Sir Philip, let me begin by congratulating my honourable friend for North Devon in securing this important debate, building on the Westminster Hall debate she secured last year. I feel I am a cheerleader for her, because it was only this time last week I was doing the ITV West Country programme. She appeared as one of the Vox spokesmen on there, and I heaped on praise on her for the work that she was doing around water quality. She is a tireless campaigner, and in particular a vocal champion of floating offshore wind, in particular through her role as chair of the all-party parliamentary group for the Celtic Sea. How she fits all this in. And she rightly highlights the benefits this new technology could bring to the UK. The world's first floating offshore wind farm was built in the UK waters. Today we have 80 megawatts of installed capacity, making us a world leader in this sector, and this builds on our world-leading status in fixed-bottom offshore wind deployment, where we have over 14 gigawatts of installed capacity, more than any other European country. And in 2010, Sir Philip, just 0.8% of UK's annual electricity was generated in offshore wind. Today, or last year, it was 17.4%, a significant transformation. And that plays an important part of our overall transformation of just 7% of our power generated by renewables in 2010, now up to 47% and continuing to expand rapidly. Sir Philip, looking to the future, we are committed to furthering our position at the forefront of this sector. Our ambition is to install up to 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, of which 5 gigawatts will come from floating offshore wind. Based on seabed exclusivity, we have the largest pipeline of floating projects in the world at 25 gigawatts, and 5 gigawatts is a stretching ambition. So we are working hard to create the right environment for investment and address barriers to deployment. Now, I am a mere deputy today. The Minister for Nuclear Renewables leads this work, but he is passionate that this is a key part of our overall strategy. Now, firstly, to address my honourable friend's main point on the contracts for difference mechanism and the budget for floating offshore wind, the CFD scheme is recognised worldwide as a model for supporting renewables deployment. Our CFD auctions has so far awarded contracts totalling around 30 gigawatts of new renewable capacity. This includes around 20 gigawatts of offshore wind, And last year's allocation round was a success story for many technologies, including marine energy and the UK's first 3 geothermal projects. But we wouldn't be having this debate if there wasn't a but. We recognise the shortfall of fixed bottom and floating offshore wind, and I acknowledge the concerns my honourable friend made at the time. And we reflected carefully on the results of allocation round 5, and following a comprehensive review of the latest evidence, we raised the administrative strike price for floating offshore wind by 52% in real terms, recognising the unprecedented upwards pressure on project costs. We also recognise the importance of the right support mechanisms for new technologies which may not yet be cost competitive. That is why this year's allocation round 6 pot 2, which is dedicated to emerging technologies such as floating offshore wind, has its biggest ever budget of 105 million. I must also say, but for that announcement yesterday that may have passed some people's attention, I would have gone to view one of those in Norway next week. Unsurprisingly, I now won't be doing that, but there is always YouTube if you want to learn about new technologies, as I discovered when I learnt about hydrogen. And I can assure her that both the Secretary of State and the Minister for Nuclear Renewables have met directly with eligible floating wind developers for allocation round 6 to understand their concerns. But I must stress there has to be a balance here. Obviously, the thrust of the debate was we need to be more generous to unlock more, and I get that, absolutely get that. We have legally binding commitments, we need to expand our basket of renewable energy sources. But we also have to be held to account by the Public Accounts Committee. Sir Philip, I served on there for 3 years. The current chair will not let you waste taxpayers' money unnecessarily, so it is always a balance. If you're overly successful, perhaps you've overpaid, so you've got to strike that balance. And Sir Philip, there are few colleagues more interested in making sure that we do not forget impact on consumer bills. And this government, whilst proud of its record in tackling climate change, will never lose sight of the fact we must do it in a pragmatic way and make sure that ultimately we deliver a cleaner and crucially more efficient energy system that leads to cheaper consumer bills. You lose sight of that, you lose public support, and you endanger all of the goodwill that we collectively are seeking to unlock. Now, Sir Philip, secondly, we recognise that port infrastructure and supply chains are critical to the long-term future of floating offshore wind in the UK. The Floating Offshore Wind Manufacturing Investment Scheme, or FLOMIS, is worth up to 160 million, and it will support investment in port infrastructure for floating offshore wind deployment. The Port of Cromarty, Firth and Port Talbot have now been placed on the FLOMIS primary list, meaning we'll take these projects forward to the next stage of due diligence. We are also supporting ports in the region through the Celtic Freeport, backed up by up to £26 million in UK government funding, and I acknowledge my friend's concerns about the FLOMIS decision and her letter to the Minister for Nuclear and Renewables on this issue. FLOMIS is a competitive scheme, and I realise the results are disappointing for the Port of Falmouth and for the Port of Milford Haven. My officials are also engaged in the Ports Task and Finish Group led by Renewable UK. This group is looking into the barriers to port investment and in identifying the most appropriate levers to overcome them. And there is no stronger champion than my honourable friend to make sure no stone is left unturned so that her constituents and neighbouring constituents will not miss out in the future. We are also taking significant action to support supply chains through the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, a fund of nearly £1.1 billion to support investment in manufacturing capability for clean energy sectors. This will enable the UK to seize growth opportunities from the transition to net zero by unlocking private investment and creating new jobs, something, again, we are the envy of the world. Sir Philip, thirdly, my honourable friend is right to highlight the potential of the Celtic Sea region for floating offshore wind, and I can assure her that the government is determined to ensure this potential is realised. As my friend will know, the Crown Estate have launched leasing round 5, making available areas of seabed that could support up to 4.5 gigawatts of capacity in the Celtic Sea. The government worked closely with the Crown Estate to unlock this opportunity, and we will continue to do so as the sector grows. In last year's autumn statement, we committed to bring forward additional floating wind in the Celtic Sea through the 2030s which could see an additional 12 gigawatts of generation deployed in this important region. Now, Sir Philip, in conclusion, Britain's geography makes it ideally suited to offshore wind, and floating offshore wind enables us to make the most of our natural resources by unlocking the potential out at sea. We are aware of the challenges involved, and we're taking a number of actions to address them, because we know that this technology is an enormous opportunity for our journey to net zero and for our economic growth. It is the local communities, such as those in the Celtic Sea region, that stand to gain the most from the economic growth and highly skilled roles that will be created. And I look forward to working with my honourable friend as we harness the enormous potential made by offshore wind power. I'm sure we will return to this in a matter of weeks.
Sir Lane Saxby to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Sir Philip, and can I thank all honourable members for their contribution and join in the Minister's comments and remarks for the Shadow Minister and wish him all the best in the future. But I think one of the things that, despite it being a small debate, it was perfectly formed, and we very much agreed, which has been the case for all of the Celtic Flow debates and projects that I have worked on. And I very much hope that that cross-party consensus, whatever happens over the next few weeks, continues, because actually industry, having this week been with developers and also with the Crown Estate myself, there is a huge drive for this to succeed. And I think this is about how do we get these projects over the line in a pragmatic manner to bring down bills in the longer term, but we need to get these things moving, otherwise we won't get there in the end. But I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions today, and on this, the final Westminster Hall debate of this Parliament. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered floating offshore wind and allocation round 6 of the contracts for difference scheme. As many as are of that opinion say aye. For the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sit-in stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.